So the first thing for today is to review a factoring. Now, the first kind of factoring is GCF factoring, greatest common factor. On number one, you ask yourself, well, let's look at that. There's not an A in both, so there's no A in the GCF because it's not common to both terms. So all we have is a number. What's the biggest number you can divide both 7 and 21 by is 7. The way you factor by GCF, you write the GCF out front. You only write it down once. Now, the question, when you answer the question, it will look like a distribution problem. What we're doing is basically backwards distributing. So distribution is multiplication. If this is backwards, I divide. 21 divided by 7, 3. Bring the A with you. Copy the minus. 7 divided by 7 is 1. Now, 2 kind of changes things up a bit. Well, we can probably figure out that you can divide both 5 and 10 by 5. Now there's an x in both. Now we can only factor out as many as we can take out of all terms. So you have to go for the lowest variable if there is an x in your GCF. So like I said, you can divide by 5. Lowest x power is 2. So 5x squared is your GCF. Now you divide. 5 divided by 5 is 1. X cubed divided by x squared. Subtract those exponents. X to the first, or just x. You don't need the 1 in front. It's the same thing. 1x is just x. Divide the second term. Copy the plus. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Your x's are gone. Three. Now, if you're not good with your times tables, you have a calculator on your Chromebook or maybe your phone, you can go in and try to divide stuff so you can, if you can find it. As a last resort, if you just if you Google GCF of 72 and 45, if you type that into a Google search, it will give you the correct GCF. In this case, it's 9. I can divide those both by 9. We got an x in both. So go with the lowest power, x to the fourth. So your GCF, 9x to the fourth. So we'll divide by our GCF. 72 divided by 9 is 8. For the exponents you're dividing, so you subtract them. You can also think, I have 6 powers of x. I'm factoring 4 out. That leaves you with 2. And then 45 divided by 9 is 5. And your x is canceled. So that was a quick little review of GCF factoring. Next kind of factoring from algebra is dots. That is difference of 2 squares. Now, difference in math means minus. So the question has to have a minus, and they all do. The way these look is you have a perfect square, a minus sign, and another perfect square. Now, by perfect squares, the numbers I mean are like 1 squared. 1 times 1 is 1. So that's a perfect square. 2 squared. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 squared. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 squared, 16. 5 squared is 25. 6 squared, 6 times 6 is 36. And so on. Now, I don't need anything bigger than that. And you could just keep going. 7 squared, 8 squared, and so on. Now, people usually remember this from algebra, this part of it. One gets a plus, the other gets a minus. You take the square root of the first, and that goes first in both. Then the square root of the second goes second in both. Now that probably looks more confusing than this really is. Like number 4, hey, r squared is a perfect square. It says square. 1 is a perfect square, and that's a minus sign. So hey, this is dots. Double parentheses. 1 gets a plus, 1 gets a minus. The square root of r squared is just r. Square root of 1 is 1. Done. Now 5, 1 gets a plus, 1 gets a minus. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 4 is 2. And there's that. That one's done. Number 6, well, we got a 9 with the b squared, but that doesn't change anything. The square root of 9 is 3, so you just stick the 3 with the b. So 3b plus 5, 3b minus 5. And you could write the minus first. It doesn't matter, as long as you have one of each. Now, usually in algebra, people don't think dots is that bad. Once they remember it, they're usually fine with that. The hardest part is just remember. But the next section, the trinomial, this tended to cause more problems for algebra students. And even when you get to trig, still, some people have trouble remembering and figuring this out. Basically, look for two numbers that multiply to the number on the end. At the same time, they'll combine. They'll like add or subtract to the number in the middle, depending on the signs. Now, at 7, the 12 is positive and the 7 is positive. So everything's a plus in this, which means we're going to find two numbers that multiply to 12 and add up to 7. So if you're thinking of factors of 12, and this is the thought process. Maybe you think 6 times 2. 6 times 2 is 12, but 6 plus 2 is 8, so that doesn't work. Then you think of another pair. 3 times 4 is 12. Hey, 3 plus 4 is 7, so that's it. Double parentheses. Variable goes first. Then you just use those two numbers. Everything's plus on this one, so it's nice and easy. 4 and 3. And you could reverse the order on that. Everything's positive. You could have p plus 3, then p plus 4. Number 8, careful of the signs. I have to multiply to positive 40. but add up to a negative. The way we multiply to positive is either with double pluses or double minuses. And if it has to add up to the negative in the middle, it's going to be double minus. Factors of 40. Think about it. Maybe 8 times 5 pops in your head first. 8 times 5 is 40, but 8 plus 5 is 13, not 14. Try again. Maybe you already knew this. It'll be 4 and 10. 4 times 10 is 40. 4 plus 10 is 14. They're both negative. You could put them in either order. They both have minuses. Now, 9, though. 9. My end is negative. That 18 is negative, which means you got to have a plus and a minus. That's the only way you can multiply to a negative, is if one is positive, one is negative. So this makes it a little bit trickier. The two numbers are opposites. So it's like they're going to subtract to 7. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 minus 2 is 7. So we got the right numbers. Now we just need the correct signs. If your sum, if that middle would be negative, the bigger one, the 9, has to get the negative. Now in this one, if you do write it differently, you've got to make sure the plus stays with 2 and the 9 stays with the minus, since negative 9 plus 2 is negative 7. If you were to reverse that, it's fine as long as you keep it with the correct signs. Those are the same thing. 10, same idea as 8. The end is positive, but the middle's negative. So it has to be a negative times a negative to get a positive, and a negative plus a negative to get that negative 5. Times 3 is 6. 2 plus 3 is 5. There you go. Now, the next question is AC factor. This is definitely the hardest thing we've done this year. And you did it in algebra. You may have done it with guess and check. I might mention that sometime, but we'll do it with AC factor. AC, you remember, you have a trinomial. It goes A, B, C. A is the number in front of x squared. B is the middle number with x. And C is 18. In this case, it's the last number. First step, multiply A times C. 2 times negative 18 is negative 36. I'll write the steps down. Write them down if you need to. Now, the second thing you want to do, and this is kind of similar to the trinomial, is find the two numbers that multiply to that result. And combine to the middle, the B. For us, 9 times 4 is 36. 9 minus 4 is 5. Now, just be careful with the signs. The 5 is negative in the question. So Make sure the bigger than 9 is negative. And what you do, split middle up to those numbers. But make sure you have your variable. Make sure you have the variable. Negative 9x plus 4x would be that negative 5x above it. That's how you can justify doing that. We didn't change anything, we just kind of broke it apart. Bring your ends down. Let me move this stuff over. Let me move this stuff over. This really is not cooperating with me right now. There we go. There. And the last thing, factor by grouping. So far this year, this has come back to everyone pretty quick. The factor by grouping part. That first part, I know people have trouble with still. The factor by grouping, you split it down the middle. Literally just draw a big line down the middle. GCF, the left side separately from the right. So on the left, well, you can't divide 2 and 9 by anything, but there is an x. X is my GCF. Lowest power is 1. Bring 2 with you, x squared over x to the first leaves you with x to the first. Then your x is canceled. The right side, I can do a GCF, I can divide those both by 2. Four divided by 2 is 2. X minus 9. Now, if this is starting to look familiar to you, when you were in algebra, you were taught, hey, you're pretty sure that you're doing this right because those parentheses match. That's a good sign you're doing this right. Now, since they match, they are common. Multiplication, which means those are factors. You have common factors. It's weird because it's a binomial, but I'm going to factor it out like it's a GCF. Only write a GCF down once. Now, the other parentheses are what's left over after you take that binomial out. On the left side, you have x. On the right side, you have plus. There you go. Now for 12, seven times 12 is negative 84. That wasn't part of the times tables you ever had to memorize. The answer here will be a negative 21 and a 4. Those definitely weren't on the times tables you had to memorize, so I'll just tell it to you this time. Make sure your variable gets put on those. Bring the ends down. Split it down the middle. You can divide both 7 and 21 by 7, and there's an n there. So 7 divided by 7 is 1. N squared divided by n leaves you with n. So I didn't need the 1 minus 3. On the right side, you can divide by 4. N minus 3, just like we need, they do match. So you're probably doing this right. Factor out that n minus 3, but only write it once. $13. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 plus 7 is 9, but that 9 is negative. Now, the way that'll work, if they're both negative, they would multiply to positive 14 and add up to negative 9. They're both negative. Split that middle up. Split it down the middle, factor by grouping. You can divide by 2 on the left, and there's an A. So you get A minus 1. Now, there is a trick on this one. My parentheses have to match. The left-hand side is plus minus, but the right-hand side is minus plus. Now, you probably know you're going to divide by 7, but if that has to match, I have to change the signs. So I'm not going to divide by positive 7. I'm going to divide by negative 7. Negative divided by negative changes that to positive A, and then that will become minus 1. Bring those out, write it down once though. 2A minus 7 is left over. And they can ask you to just factor by grouping. I figured I'd practice a couple of these. You go right to splitting it down the middle. You do that when there are 4 terms. The GCF on the left is 7, but this time there's n squared. 7 divided by 7 is 1. N cubed over n squared leaves you with n. 35 divided by 7 is 5. On the right-hand side, you have 8. Those match. Factor it out, but just write it once. And you got 7n squared plus 8 left over. 15. Split it down the middle. 5x squared, 15 divided by 5 is 3x. You're dividing that whole thing by itself, which is 1. On the right side, 6, but again, we got to worry about the signs. It goes double plus, then double minus. If I need to make that match, I'm going to divide by negative 6. Switches that to 3x plus 1. All right, factor that out. Just write it once. Now, the next topic is actually new. Simplifying now, it says rationals. A rational number is a number that you can write as a fraction. Probably irrational is more familiar to you, like pi. Pi you can't write as a fraction. But we have a problem. We're trying to reduce fractions down, but these are more complicated fractions with variables, pluses and minuses. Pluses and minuses pose a big problem. A fraction needs to divide. Division does not cancel out plus and minus. So I can't just start reducing it. Division does cancel out multiplication. So I need to break those apart into 2 things being multiplied, which is factored, which is why we just practiced it. Now the top you can't factor. There's no square. There's no GCF. I just bring it with me. The bottom is dots. You have a perfect square, a minus sign, and a perfect square. N plus 2 and n minus 2. Just like we practiced on the last page. N plus 2 is the same on top and bottom. They cancel out. When you have something in division on the top and bottom, it cancels out. N minus 2 is left over, but it's on the bottom. It can't just jump up to the top. So then you think, well, in division, when you divide something by itself, it cancels out, but it really makes 1. So we stick a 1 there on top as a placeholder. 2, I didn't mean for 1 like number 2 to be on there. Just forget about it. We'll go over 1 like that at a later time. 3, we got to factor again. There's no square on the top, so I just bring it with me. The bottom, 10 times 3 is 30. 10 minus 3 is 7. So it's 10 and 3, but if it's a negative middle, that 7 is negative, the bigger one. The 10 has to be negative. A minus 10's cancel. Just remember A plus 3 has to stay on the bottom. Fill a 1 in on the top. Number 4, don't forget that K in the middle would have a 1. 8 times 7 is 56. 8 minus 7 is 1. Just make sure the bigger one is negative. On the bottom, 24 is positive, but the middle's negative, so they both have to be minus. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 plus 3 is 11. So you use 8 and 3. 8's cancel. K plus 7 over K minus 3. 5, well, 5 is nice. Everything's plus. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 plus 5 is 8. So the top is 3 and 5. The bottom, 2 times 5, 10. 2 plus 5, 7. X plus 5's cancel. X plus 3 over X plus 2. Number 6. Got to have 1 of each, so they multiply to negative. 5 minus 2 is 3, so 5 and 2. The bottom is that dots again. Perfect square, minus sign, perfect square. X plus 5, X minus 5. X plus 5's cancel. Your answer is X minus 2 over X minus 5. And lastly, this will actually be probably the easiest thing, and this one is new, kind of. Undefined fractions. Now, a fraction means to divide. I don't know how much you remember, but if you try to divide by 0 on your calculator, you get an error. You can't divide by 0. Fraction means top divided by the bottom. If the bottom's 0, you can put 0 into something forever. You'll never fill it up. But infinity isn't really a number, so it's called undefined. So all you do for these, forget about the top. Just set the bottom equal to 0 and solve. So like I said, forget about the top. Set the bottom equal to 0. solve. There's no square here. This isn't anything fancy, this one. It's just a two-step equation. Add 100. Divide by 50. 100 divided by 50 is 2. 2 is even easier. Forget about the top. Set the bottom equal to 0. Minus 4. B equals negative 4. Number 3. Set the bottom equal to 0. Don't know what happened there. Set the bottom equal to 0. Minus 7, B equals negative 7. Now, 4 does throw a bit of curveball. We have a quadratic equation on the bottom. Now, in algebra, you learned to solve quadratics. There are a few different ways, but the first way you ever learned was get one side equal to 0. We already have that. And then factor. Minus 7, b plus 3. Now, I don't know if you remember why, but if your factor is b minus 7, the answer is b equals positive 7. Switch the signs. B equals negative 3. 5, though, goes back. There is no square or anything, so two-step minus 32 divided by 8, negative 4. Number 6, now it says squared. There is another way to do this one, but I already mentioned just factoring, so we'll just factor. Set the bottom equal to 0. It's dots. A plus 4, A minus 4. And like I said, if your factor is A plus 4, is 0, the root, the answer is negative 4. A equals negative 4. And that one gives me A equals